That cold morning, no one expected an act of compassion to change everything. What started as another quiet day near the reserve became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, every roar and every breath matters, because behind every white tiger there is a story worth saving. The frost clung to the pines like a fragile promise, the kind that breaks under the weight of winter's first real bite. In the shadowed underbelly of the Whispering Ridge Wildlife Reserve, where the forest met the ragged edge of human sprawl, the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and something sharper, something alive and fading. It was the kind of dawn that silenced even the birds, as if the world itself held its breath. Deep in a thicket of brambles and fallen logs, a white tigress lay curled against the cold, her flanks heaving with labored rhythm. Her coat, once a pristine shroud of snow-dusted fur, was matted now, streaked with the mud of her desperate trek. She had wandered far from the heart of the reserve, driven by instincts older than the trees around her, seeking a hidden den to birth her young. But the winter had been cruel, stripping the land bare, and her body, weakened by scarce prey and endless patrols against encroaching farms, betrayed her. A low, rumbling groan escaped her throat, not the fierce roar of legend, but a whisper of pain, ragged and raw. Her golden eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, flickered toward the dim light filtering through the canopy. One paw twitched, claws retracted, as if reaching for something just out of grasp. The contractions came in waves, each one pulling a shallow breath from her chest, visible in the plume of vapor that rose like smoke. No blood stained the ground, but the air carried the metallic tang of struggle, the quiet urgency of life clinging to the edge. Nearby in the underbrush, a faint rustle stirred. Not the wind, but something smaller, more tentative. A doe, her brown coat blending seamlessly with the bark and leaves, paused mid-step. She was no stranger to these woods, a survivor of the same harsh season, her own fawn lost to a predator's shadow weeks before. Her ears flicked forward, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar scent. Musk and milk mingled with the tigress's weakening essence. The doe froze, her dark eyes wide, body tense as if deciding between flight and the pull of an unseen call. The tigress's breath hitched, a final, shuddering exhale that carried across the clearing. Her massive form stilled, the rise and fall of her sides slowing to nothing. In the silence that followed, a tiny mule pierced the quiet, a cub, slick and trembling, emerging into a world it wasn't ready for. The white tiger cub, no larger than a house cat, pawed blindly at the cold ground, its fur a fragile veil of cream and black stripes. Eyes sealed shut against the chill, it nuzzled toward its mother's warmth, seeking the nourishment that would never come. The doe edged closer, her hooves crunching softly on the frost-kissed leaves. Fear warred in her stance, instinct screaming of danger from this pale ghost of a predator. But something deeper, a maternal echo, drew her in. She lowered her head, sniffing the cub's damp fur, the scent of vulnerability overriding the wild unknown. With a soft snort, she nudged it gently, her muzzle warm against its shivering body. The cub let out another plaintive cry, and in response the doe circled once, then lay down beside it, curling her form to shield the tiny creature from the wind. Her own milk, still flowing from a loss she couldn't forget, began to trickle as the cub's mouth found her side, latching on with desperate instinct. Miles away, at the edge of the reserve, Ranger Elias Thorne sipped black coffee from a chipped mug, staring out the fogged window of his station. The wooden cabin creaked under the weight of isolation, its walls lined with maps marked in red for poacher trails and faded photos of animals he'd sworn to protect. Elias was a man of routines, 42 years old, with calloused hands and eyes that had seen too many sunsets without answers. He'd come to Whispering Ridge after a divorce that left him hollow, seeking solace in the wild's unyielding truth. But this morning, As the radio crackled with static and the first light painted the horizon in bruised purples, a call came through from a local farmer. "Something's out there, Elias. Big cat white as snow, dead in the thicket off County Road 17, and there's a young'un with it. But it ain't right. Looks like a deer's taken to it." Elias set the mug down, his grip tightening. White tiger? In these parts? The reserve had rumors of escaped exotics, but nothing confirmed. He grabbed his coat, the wool heavy with the scent of pine sap and old regrets, and headed out into the cold. The truck's engine growled to life, tires crunching gravel as he navigated the winding back roads, past empty fields where frost etched patterns like veins on the earth. By the time he reached the thicket, the doe had risen, her form vanishing into the trees like a shadow retreating from light. The tigress lay as if asleep, majestic even in death, her body a testament to the wild's quiet dignity. Elias approached slowly, breath clouding the air, his boots sinking into the soft ground. He knelt beside her, gloved hand hovering above her fur, a silent respect for the life that had ended here. Then his eyes caught the movement, the cub, staggering on unsteady legs, its tiny frame dwarfed by the tragedy around it. It collapsed near the tigress's side, mewling weakly, its sides heaving with the effort of survival. But something was off. The cub's belly was rounded, not from hunger alone, but from milk. Elias's heart stuttered. He scanned the surroundings, spotting the faint imprints of hooves in the frost. A deer, nursing a tiger cub, the absurdity of it hit him like the cold wind. But there was no time for doubt. This was no ordinary find. It was a fragile thread in the web of life, pulling at something deep within him. He radioed for backup, a vet from the nearby rehab center, Lena Voss, a woman whose steady hands had mended more broken wings than she cared to count. As he waited, Elias scooped the cub gently into his jacket, feeling its warmth against his chest, the rapid flutter of its heart. The cub didn't fight. It simply nestled closer, eyes still closed to the world, trusting in a compassion it couldn't yet understand. Lena arrived 20 minutes later, her SUV kicking up dust that swirled like ghosts in the morning light. She was in her late 30s, with sharp features softened by years of quiet battles against indifference. Stepping from the vehicle, she took one look at the scene and felt her resolve harden. "We can't leave it," she said, her voice low, more to herself than Elias. He nodded, the weight of the moment settling between them like the frost on the ground. In the reserve's world, where humans drew lines between safety and the wild, this cub blurred them all. As they loaded it into the warmth of the truck, the doe watched from the tree line, her eyes reflecting a bond forged in silence. No one spoke of miracles that day, but in the cab's quiet hum, Elias felt the stirrings of one, a chance to choose kindness over fear, to protect what the wild had already begun to save. The road ahead stretched empty, engines cooling in the distance, and the cub's breaths steadied against the promise of hope. The truck rumbled along the frost-laced back roads, its headlights cutting through the thinning dawn like hesitant fingers. Inside the cab, the air was thick with the scent of heated vinyl and the faint, milky warmth of the cub nestled in Elias's jacket. Its tiny body rose and fell in shallow rhythms, each breath a fragile negotiation with the cold world beyond the window. Lena sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the bundle as if willing it to hold on. The radio hummed softly with static, a companion to the silence that wrapped around them, broken only by the occasional creak of the suspension over uneven gravel. Whispering Ridge stretched out like a forgotten memory, endless pines bowing under snow's first whisper, fields barren and etched with the skeletons of last summer's corn. The reserve wasn't vast, just a patchwork of protected land hemmed in by farms and small towns where folks whispered about those wild things over coffee at the diner. Elias had patrolled these edges for years, marking boundaries that humans ignored and animals paid for. Today, those lines felt blurred, the cub's presence a quiet accusation against the barriers he'd helped enforce. They reached the rehab center by mid-morning, the facility a low-slung building of weathered brick tucked against the forest's flank. It was Lena's domain, a place of second chances funded by grants and donations that never quite covered the quiet heartbreaks. As Elias pulled up to the loading dock, the cub stirred, letting out a mew that echoed like a question in the still air. Lena reached over, her fingers brushing its fur, soft as down, pale as moonlight on fresh snow. "Easy now," she murmured, more breath than words, as they carried it inside. The exam room was a sanctuary of controlled chaos. Stainless steel tables scarred from use, shelves lined with vials and bandages, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Dr. Harlan Reed, the center's senior vet, was already waiting. Summoned by Lena's urgent call, he was a man in his 50s, broad-shouldered with a face etched by skepticism, his white coat hanging loose over flannel. Harlan had seen it all, or so he thought, from orphaned owls to road-struck deer, but a white tiger cub? That was folklore, not fact. His eyes narrowed as Elias laid the bundle on the table, the cub's form unfolding like a secret revealed. "What in God's name is this?" Harlan's voice cut the quiet, not unkind, but edged with doubt. He leaned in, gloved hands hovering, the cub's golden-sealed eyes turning blindly toward the sound. It pawed the air weakly, seeking the warmth it had known from the doe, its sides still rounded from that impossible nursing. Elias stood back, arms crossed, the weight of the thicket still clinging to his boots. Found her with her mother. Dead, Tigress wandered in from somewhere. And get this, a doe was with the cub. Looked like it was feeding her. Harlan snorted, a sound like dry leaves underfoot. "A deer nursing a tiger, that's a tall tale for the bar, Thorn. White tigers aren't native here. Circus escapee, poacher's pet gone wrong." He probed gently, checking the cub's limbs, its heartbeat a rapid flutter under his stethoscope. The cub didn't cry out, just trembled, its breath hitching in the sterile chill. Lena watched, her jaw set, as Harlan continued his assessment. No broken bones, but dehydration gnawed at its edges, the milk from the doe a temporary bridge over deeper hunger. Word spread through the center like frost creeping across glass. Staff gathered at the door, techs in scrubs, a young intern with wide eyes, even the receptionist peering from her desk. Whispers rippled. "Dangerous," one said, voice low. "Exotic means trouble. Could have rabies or worse." Another nodded, arms folded. "We should call animal control. Let them handle it. This place is for locals, not some freak show cat." The cub lay still under the lights, its presence a silent plea amid the judgment, fur catching the glow like fresh powder. It wasn't a monster to them, but an intruder, a risk to the fragile balance they maintained. Elias felt the tension coil in his chest, the same knot that had formed years ago when he'd let a wounded fox slip away into the night. Too afraid to intervene, he stepped forward, voice steady but soft. "She's just a baby. Mother gone, no one's coming for her. If we turn her away—" He trailed off, the words hanging like mist. Harlan paused, his hands stilling on the cub's flank. The room quieted, the only sound the cub's labored breathing, a rhythm that demanded attention. Lena moved then, a small act amid the scrutiny. She fetched a warmed blanket from the warmer, draping it over the cub with deliberate care, her fingers lingering to stroke its head. The cub leaned into the touch, a faint rumble vibrating in its throat, not a growl, but a purr of instinctual trust. "If we don't help her," Lena said, eyes meeting Harlan's, "no one will. She's not choosing this world, it's choosing her." Her voice cracked just once, betraying the tremor in her hands, the echo of her own losses. a stillborn foal on her family's farm, years that hardened her against such fragility. Harlan exhaled, long and slow, the skepticism in his eyes softening to something resigned. All right, we'll stabilize her. Fluids, milk formula, tiger-specific, if we can get it shipped. He turned to the team, issuing quiet orders, the room shifting from doubt to motion. As they worked, the cub's breaths evened, its body relaxing under the blanket's embrace. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like a distant warning, but inside, a fragile peace settled. By afternoon, the cub was in a heated enclosure, a makeshift den of soft bedding and monitored warmth. Elias lingered at the glass, watching her sleep, the doe's hoofprints still vivid in his mind, a wild mercy that shamed human hesitation. Lena joined him, coffee in hand, steam rising like the cub's earlier plumes. "People fear what they don't understand," she said, gaze fixed on the pale form. "But look at her, she's not asking for much." The reserve's edges pressed in, highways empty under grey skies. But in that moment, the cub's survival became a quiet rebellion against indifference. Harlan passed by, pausing to nod. "We'll see how she pulls through. Nature's got a way of surprising us." No one mentioned the doe again that day, but her shadow lingered, a bond unspoken, pulling at the threads of compassion in a world quick to judge. As evening fell, the center's lights dimmed, leaving the cub in soft glow. Its eyes remained closed, but in dreams, perhaps, it remembered the warmth of fur, not its own, a promise that kindness could cross even the wildest divides. The road ahead was uncertain, engines cooling in the distance, but for now the cub breathed on, a symbol etched in silence. The days blurred into a hushed rhythm at the rehab center, each one marked by the cub's tentative breaths echoing through the corridors like a fragile metronome. The enclosure, a spacious pen of reinforced glass and soft substrate, became her world, a pale sanctuary where the outside chill seeped in only as faint drafts through the vents. She was named Arya by Lena, a whisper of sound for the mules that had first drawn her in, though no one said it aloud often, as if naming her made the impossibility more real. Arya's fur, still damp from the morning's misting, gleamed under the low lights, her sealed eyes beginning to crack open in slits of amber curiosity. But survival was no gentle tale. It was a slow unraveling of instincts clashing against the unknown. Elias returned each evening after patrols, his truck's engine fading to a sigh in the gravel lot. The reserve's edges had grown restless, farmers murmuring about a ghost cat sighting, their shotguns cleaned a little too often. He leaned against the glass now, watching Arya pace her small domain on unsteady paws, her tail flicking like a question unanswered. The doe's milk had sustained her briefly, but now formula bottles warmed in the sink, fed by gloved hands that trembled with the weight of what they held. Elias had never been one for tenderness. His life was maps and fences, not cradles. Yet here he was, slipping into the pen during quiet hours, his voice a low rumble as he offered the bottle. Arya latched on hesitantly, her tiny tongue working with desperate focus. Eyes half open to the stranger's scent, pine and earth, mingled with something warmer, human. Lena observed from the doorway, her shift ending but her feet rooted. She was the steady one, the vet who bandaged without flinching. But Arya stirred echoes she'd buried deep. A decade ago, on a rain-slicked road much like these, her brother had wrapped their childhood dog in his coat after a hit-and-run, only to watch it slip away in his arms. The guilt had carved lines around her eyes, a reminder that compassion could cost more than it saved. "You're good with her," she said finally, stepping closer, her breath visible in the cooling air. Elias shrugged, not meeting her gaze, the bottle steady in his grip. Silence stretched, broken only by Arya's contented suckling, her body curling against his knee as if claiming the warmth, but not everyone saw mercy in the act. Harlan gathered the staff that afternoon in the break room, a cramped space smelling of instant coffee and antiseptic. Maps of the reserve lay spread on the table, red pins marking recent intrusions, poachers testing the borders, a coyote pack pushing inward. "This cub's a wild card," he said, voice gravelly, tapping a photo of Arya's enclosure. The room held a dozen faces, Tex with weary postures, the intern twisting her hands, a wildlife photographer named Mira who'd heard the rumors and shown up with her camera slung low. Mira was an outsider, mid-30s with wind-tousled hair and a notebook filled with sketches of elusive creatures, but her eyes held a sharper judgment. Exotics like this disrupt everything. One wrong move, and she's a liability, attacks livestock, draws crowds. We should relocate her to a proper facility, or... He trailed off, the word unspoken hanging like frost. Murmurs rippled, fear masked as practicality. "She's not even weaned properly," one tech added, arms crossed. "What if she turns aggressive? We've got real animals here, not circus rejects." The contrast stung. Arya, alone in her pen, pawing at the glass with innocent curiosity, her form a symbol of vulnerability they dismissed as threat. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, carrying the distant low of cattle, a reminder of the farms that bordered their haven. Mira leaned forward, her voice cutting soft but firm. "I've seen white tigers in captivity, beautiful but broken. This one's wild-born. Letting her stay invites trouble for all of us." Elias, who'd slipped in quietly, felt the knot tighten in his throat. He thought of the tigress in the thicket, her final breath a plea ignored by the world. Stepping into the light, he met Harlan's eyes. Trouble? She's the one in trouble. That doe didn't see a monster, she saw need. If we send her away now, we're no better than the cold that killed her mother. His words landed heavy, the room stilling. Lena nodded subtly, her hand brushing Arya's latest feeding log, tears held back behind a professional mask. Harlan rubbed his jaw, the skepticism cracking like thin ice. In that pause, a small act unfolded. The intern, silent until now, fetched a toy, a stuffed deer from the lost and found bin, and placed it in the pen through the slot. Arya batted at it weakly, a spark of play in her eyes, the gesture awakening something raw. "If we don't help her," Lena whispered, echoing her earlier resolve, "who will? She's choosing us in her way." Tension built as night fell, the center's generators humming against the encroaching dark. Arya's first real crisis came then, a fever spiking from the stress of relocation, her breath shallow and rapid, body limp against the bedding. Harlan worked late, IV fluids dripping in the dim exam room, his hands steady but face drawn. Elias paced outside, the cold seeping through his jacket, while Lena monitored vitals, her breath hitching at each weak rumble from the cub. Mira, who'd stayed to document, captured the scene in low light. No flash, just shadows and resolve. Her lens lingering on Elias's trembling vigil. "This could end badly," she said softly, but there was no conviction left. The cub's struggle reframed her stance, a silent judgment turning to quiet awe. Hours passed in that vigil. The world outside, reduced to empty highways and cooling engines. Arya's fever broke near dawn, her eyes fully opening to golden slits that fixed on Elias as he entered, a recognition in their depths, instinct acknowledging the hands that hadn't turned away. He knelt, offering his palm, and she nuzzled it, a bond forming in the hush. Lena joined them, tears finally spilling as she stroked the cub's flank. "We almost lost her," she breathed, the emotional truth surfacing. Saving Arya wasn't just about the wild. It was about reclaiming pieces of themselves lost to fear and failure. As the first light filtered through the blinds, the staff dispersed, the moral suspense easing into tentative hope. Harlan lingered, watching Arya sleep. "Nature's full of shocks," he muttered, a half-smile breaking through. The doe's shadow faded, but her legacy pulsed in the cub's steady breaths. a reminder that compassion, born from the edge of danger, could rewrite even the harshest tales. The reserve waited beyond, dust in the wind, but inside, a fragile family took root. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and compassion can travel. Weeks turned to months in the quiet cadence of the rehab center, the calendar flipping like pages in a forgotten journal, marking Arya's growth against the relentless march of seasons. Spring thawed the reserve's edges, turning frost to mud and coaxing green shoots from the earth, but inside the enclosure, Arya's world expanded in measured steps. Her body lengthened, pores gaining the clumsy strength of youth, her white fur shedding its downy softness for a sleek sheen that caught the sunlight filtering through the overhead vents. No longer the trembling bundle from the thicket, she prowled her pen with a tentative grace, golden eyes now wide and watchful, scanning the glass as if memorizing the faces beyond. Elias's visits became ritual, the ranger's truck, a familiar growl in the lot each dusk. He brought scents from the wild, pine needles tucked in his pocket, a sprig of grass from the meadows, slipping them under the enclosure's edge to stir her instincts. Arya would pause, nostrils flaring, then approach with a low chuff, her breath warm against the barrier. It was in these silences that the bond deepened, unspoken words weaving between man and cub. Elias sat cross-legged for hours, his back against the cool wall, recounting patrols in murmurs, the river's rush after rain, the hawk's shadow over the fields. Arya listened, head tilted, her tail curling like a question. He never spoke of his own hollows, the wife who'd left, the daughter he'd barely known before custody slipped away like sand. But in Arya's presence, the ache softened, her trusting gaze a mirror to the redemption he sought. Lena, too, found solace in the routine, her hands steadier now as she administered checkups, feeling the cub's heartbeat sync with her own. The center's days hummed with activity, orphaned raccoons chittering in adjacent pens, a fox kit learning to hunt on softened prey. But Arya drew them all, a pale enigma amid the ordinary. Harlan monitored her progress with gruff efficiency, noting her weight gains in logs, but his skepticism lingered like morning fog. "She's thriving," he'd say during rounds, voice neutral. "But wild doesn't mean tame. One day those claws will remind us." The staff echoed his caution in hushed tones over lunch, fears of escapes, of the cub outgrowing her space, drawing unwanted eyes from the town. Mira, the photographer, returned often, her camera capturing Arya's leaps in frozen moments, but even she whispered doubts to Lena one evening. "Beauty like that invites envy. People will come, and not all for saving." The moral suspense built subtly, a tension coiling in the air like the reserve's gathering storms. Whispers from the bordering farms escalated, tales of a white devil prowling the nights, livestock vanishing into shadows that might have been coyotes or just hunger. Elias dismissed them during town hall meetings, his voice steady amid the murmurs, but doubt gnawed at him. One overcast afternoon, as thunder rumbled distant, a call came to the station. A farmer on the reserve's fringe, voice edged with panic, claiming paw prints too large for bobcats near his barn. Elias drove out, alone, the road winding through fields where dust devils danced, his mind on Arya's enlarging paws, now capable of leaving marks that blurred lines between protector and threat. He found the prints in the soft earth, broad, deliberate, leading toward the rehab center's fence line. Heart heavy, he followed them, boots sinking into the mud, the air thick with the scent of wet soil and something wilder. They ended at a gap where wire had sagged, not broken, but enough for a curious cub to nose through. No harm done, no sheep lost, but the implication hung. Arya was testing boundaries, her instincts awakening to a world beyond glass. Back at the center, he shared the find with Harlan and Lena in the dim office, maps unrolled under lamplight. "She's not escaping," Elias said, tracing the prints with a finger. "But she's curious. We can't keep her caged forever." Harlan leaned back, chair creaking, his face shadowed. "And release her where? The wild here would eat her alive. Poachers, roads, no kin to teach her." The room fell silent, the weight of decision pressing like the storm outside, rain pattering against the windows. Lena's hands trembled as she folded a report, her breath hitching at the thought of Arya alone, echoing her brother's futile drive that rainy night. "We raised her on hope," she whispered, eyes on the enclosure visible through the blinds, where Arya slept curled in a beam of fading light. "Turning her out now, it's like abandoning our own." Mira, who joined them uninvited, set her camera down with a soft thud. Her sketches of Arya filled a notebook, eyes like suns, form a blend of ferocity and fragility, but now her voice carried a new edge. "I followed stories like this. Captivity breaks them, release kills them. But look what she's done for us, made us see past fear." The words hung, a turning point in the hush, as lightning flashed, illuminating Arya's form. She stirred, rising to press her nose to the glass, as if sensing the turmoil. The emotional pivot came quietly that night, after the others left. Elias entered the pen alone, the gate clicking shut behind him, rain drumming a steady rhythm on the roof. Arya approached warily, her growth making her nearly shoulder-high, but she lowered her head, nuzzling his hand with a rumble that vibrated through his bones. He knelt, burying his face in her fur, warm, alive, scented of hay and wild promise. Tears came unbidden, hot against the cool strands, the first since his daughter's photo had gathered dust. "I failed before," he murmured, voice breaking in the enclosure's dim glow. "Let go when I should have held on. Not you." Arya stilled, her golden eyes locking on his, a silent recognition passing between them. Instinct meeting grief, forging loyalty in the storm's embrace. Outside, Lena watched from the doorway, her own tears held back no longer, spilling as she clutched the fence. The revelation reframed the night. Arya wasn't just a cub, she was the bridge to their buried selves, demanding they choose compassion over caution. Harlan, passing by on his way out, paused at the sight, his resolve cracking. "We'll figure it," he said softly, more to the rain than them, the first admission of faith. As the storm eased, leaving puddles like mirrors on the ground, Arya settled beside Elias, her head on his lap, breaths sinking in the quiet. The reserve's highways gleamed wet under moonlight, engines silent in the distance, but in that pen, redemption took root, a bond that would test them all, pulling toward horizons yet unseen. The world beyond waited, full of judgments and dangers, but for now the white tiger's warmth held the shadows at bay. Summer deepened the reserve's embrace, turning the air thick with the hum of insects and the earthy tang of wildflowers pushing through cracked soil. Arya's enclosure had evolved into a larger paddock, chain link reinforced with logs and platforms to mimic the forest's spine, where she could stretch her lengthening limbs under the watchful eyes of security cameras. At nearly a year old, she was a vision of emerging power. Her white coat rippling over muscles honed by play and provision, stripes like shadows etched in ink. Her roars, once mules, now carried a resonant depth that echoed off the pines, stirring birds from their perches. Yet in her golden gaze lingered the cub's innocence, a quiet plea that bound her to the humans who'd become her unlikely kin. Elias's patrols grew longer, the ranger's days swallowed by the reserve's restless fringes where human encroachment gnawed like termites at old wood. Farms pressed closer, their floodlights bleeding into the night, and reports of sightings multiplied. Arya's silhouette mistaken for a phantom by night-shift drivers on empty highways. He returned to the center exhausted, dust caking his boots, but always detoured to her paddock. There, in the cooling dusk, he sat on a weathered bench, the fence between them a fragile divide. Arya would pad over, her massive paws silent on the grass, pressing her flank against the wire until it bowed slightly under her weight. No words passed, just the shared rhythm of breaths, his steady, hers, a deep bellows that warmed the chill settling in his bones. In those moments, the world's judgments faded, the divorce papers gathering dust, the daughter's distant letters unanswered, replaced by the simple truth of her trust. Lena's routine mirrored his, her veterinary rounds now including Arya's daily exams, gloved hands tracing scars from early fevers, listening to the strong thrum beneath her fur. The centre buzzed with summer's influx, injured birds from fledgling foals, a litter of fox kits orphaned by distemper. But Arya commanded the unspoken centre, her presence drawing volunteers and curious locals who peered through the gates, whispers trailing like smoke. Harlan's caution had mellowed into watchful routine, though he confided in Elias one humid evening over lukewarm coffee in the office. She's a force now, beautiful, but that beauty's got teeth. One slip, and we're all reminded why we fear the wild. His eyes, shadowed by the desk lamp, held the weight of past failures. A bear he'd euthanized too soon, its eyes haunting his sleep. Mira, the photographer, had become a fixture, her lens chronicling Arya's transformation in a series of prints pinned to the breakroom walls. The cub's first steps, her leaps into sunlight, Elias's silhouette against her form. Yet even she sensed the undercurrent of unease, capturing the staff's furtive glances, the way conversations hushed when Arya's roar split the air. "Stories like this end in heartbreak," she told Lena during a quiet shift, her camera idle for once, fingers tracing a sketch of the doe's imagined vigil. "The world's not built for miracles. People will want her. Zoos, collectors, or worse. They'll fear her enough to end it." Lena nodded, her breath catching at the thought, hands stilling on a supply cart. The emotional undercurrents ran deep. Saving Arya had unearthed her own buried grief. The brother's accident, a scar that ached in the quiet hours, reminding her that bonds could shatter as easily as they formed. The rising tension crested on a sweltering afternoon, the sky bruised with the promise of thunder. Elias was en route from a boundary check when his radio crackled to life. Lena's voice, edged with urgency. "Elias, get here now. Arya's hurt. Bad." His truck veered sharply, tires spitting gravel as he raced the winding road, heart pounding against his ribs like a caged bird. The centre loomed ahead, staff clustered at the paddock gate, faces pale under the relentless sun. Harlan knelt inside the enclosure, his coat discarded, sweat beading on his brow as he examined Arya's foreleg. She lay on her side, breaths laboured and ragged, a low whine escaping her throat. Not the fierce growl of threat, but a plea woven with pain. A gash marred her paw. Deep from a rusted shard of fence she'd clawed through in a moment of frustrated curiosity, blood welling dark against her white fur, the metallic scent sharp in the humid air. No gore marred the scene, just the stark reality of her struggle, eyes half-lidded in exhaustion, body trembling as contractions of agony rippled through her. The shard had caught an artery, Harlan explained in clipped tones as Elias pushed through, his hands already reaching for her. "Field surgery or she bleeds out. We move her, risk more damage." The moral suspense hung thick, decisions fracturing the air. Call authorities for sedation that might overwhelm her, or improvise here, in the open, where her instincts could turn desperate. Staff hovered at the edges, the intern twisting her hands, Mira's camera forgotten on the ground, fear etching their stances. "She's too big now," one murmured, voice trembling. "What if she lashes out? We've seen cats turn." The contrast pierced, Arya, vulnerable in her pain, silently enduring as humans debated her worth. Her golden eyes flicking toward Elias with a recognition that begged intervention. Lena moved first, a small act amid the chaos. Kneeling beside Arya, her coat draped over the cub's flank to staunch the flow, hands steady despite the hitch in her breath. "Hold on, girl," she whispered, voice breaking the hush, tears blurring her vision as memories flooded. The dog's final whimpers in her brother's arms, the helplessness that had defined her. "If we don't, no one will." Elias joined her, his calloused palms pressing a makeshift tourniquet, the warmth of her fur seeping through, grounding him. Harlan worked swiftly, tools laid out on a sterile cloth, scalpel glinting, sutures ready, his face a mask of focus in the gathering heat. The air thickened with the scent of antiseptic and earth, thunder rumbling closer as Arya's whines softened to shallow pants, her trust a fragile thread holding the scene together. The extraction unfolded in tense silence, broken only by the snip of scissors and the drip of fluids from an IV line jury-rigged to a tree stump. Arya's body tensed once, a reflexive shudder that sent a ripple of fear through the group, but she stilled at Elias's low murmur, his voice an anchor in the storm. Mira captured fragments, the gloved hands working in unison, Lena's tear-streaked resolve, but her lens trembled, the sight reframing her cynicism into quiet reverence. As Harlan tied the final stitch, the clouds burst, rain sheeting down in cold sheets, washing the blood from the grass, cooling Arya's fevered form. She lifted her head weakly, nuzzling Lena's hand, a rumble of gratitude vibrating through the downpour. In the aftermath, as they wheeled her to the recovery room, the group dispersed, soaked and spent, the crisis forging a deeper unity. Elias lingered outside the door, rain dripping from his hat, the weight of the day settling like the mud underfoot. Lena joined him, her shoulder brushing his, breaths sinking in the easing storm. "We almost lost her," she said softly, the words carrying the emotional truth. This wasn't just survival. It was their own redemption, clawed from the edge of fear. Harlan passed, nodding once, his skepticism washed away in the deluge. "She's tougher than us," he muttered, a rare warmth in his tone. Night fell with the rain's retreat, leaving puddles like shattered mirrors on the paths. Inside, Arya slept under monitored lights, her bandaged paw twitching in dreams of forests unbound. The reserve's edges quieted, highways glistening under stars, engines distant and cooling. But the bond pulsed stronger, a silent justice in her steady breaths, a white tiger's innocence demanding the world confront its own heart, one compassionate choice at a time. Autumn painted the reserve in strokes of amber and crimson, leaves drifting like embers on the wind, settling in soft piles around the now vast enclosure that had become Arya's domain. 2 years had woven their quiet tapestry since the rain-soaked surgery, time etching maturity into her form, a full-grown white tigress, her body a symphony of sinew and grace, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of legends. She moved through her paddock with purposeful strides, muscles rippling beneath fur that gleamed like fresh snow under the slanting sun, her golden eyes holding depths that spoke of forests uncharted and bonds unbroken. The air carried her scent on breezes that rustled the perimeter trees, a musk of earth and wild promise, mingling with the fading warmth of summer's retreat. Elias's hair had silvered at the temples, his patrols a ritual etched deeper into his days, but the ranger's steps always led back to her. The fence between them, once a barrier, now felt like a thread in a larger weave. He no longer sat outside but entered with practiced caution, her presence a calm tide that washed away the reserve's encroaching shadows. Arya would circle him once, a low chuff vibrating the air, then settle with her head in his lap, breaths deep and even, as if sharing the silence of his unspoken regrets. The daughter's letters had come more often, tentative bridges over years of distance, and in Arya's steady gaze, Elias found the courage to reply, words of hope, not hollow promises. Their bond, forged in that stormy enclosure, had become his anchor, a quiet redemption that softened the edges of isolation. Lena's hands, once trembling in crises, now moved with a surgeon's precision during Arya's routine checks, her laughter lighter in the center's halls where once doubt had reigned. The facility had expanded, funded in part by Mira's photographs, images of Arya that graced calendars and exhibits, drawing whispers of wonder from distant cities. Yet Harlan's warnings lingered like autumn fog, his rounds a reminder of the wild's unyielding truth. "She's no pet," he'd say in the dim office, maps updated with new threats, poacher drones humming at night, urban sprawl chewing at the borders. The staff, once divided, now watched Arya with a mix of awe and vigilance. The intern promoted to lead tech, Mira's sketches evolving into advocacy sketches that challenged the town's fears. But the whispers persisted from the fringes, tales of the white ghost fueling calls to the station. Relocate her, contain her, before she became a symbol of chaos. The moral suspense simmered beneath the season's calm, a tension building like the first frost's bite. Arya's instincts had sharpened, her roars echoing farther, drawing nocturnal visitors to the fence lines. Curious deer, wary coyotes, and once a lone wolf that vanished into the underbrush. Elias noted the changes in his logs, her pacing at dusk, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the reserve, a silent plea for skies unbound. Released discussions had surfaced in hushed meetings, Harlan's voice gravelly with caution, Lena's breath hitching at the risk. "She's ours now," she'd murmur, fingers tracing the faded scar on Arya's paw, the rain-soaked memory a tether to their shared survival. Mira captured these deliberations in candid shots, her lens lingering on the unspoken fears. What if the wild rejected her? What if humans didn't? The turning point arrived on a crisp evening, the sun dipping low to gild the paddock in liquid gold. Elias was inside with Arya, his hand buried in her fur as she lounged against him when Lena burst through the gate, face pale, eyes wide with urgency. "Elias, outside, the edge of the reserve. You need to see this." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but something deeper, a hitch that pulled at the air. Harlan followed, radio in hand, the group moving as one toward the truck, engines roaring to life against the cooling dusk. The road wound through falling leaves, headlights piercing the gathering twilight, silence thick as they neared the boundary where forest met field. There, in a clearing bathed by the moon's rising glow, stood a scene that stilled their breaths. A doe, older now, her coat dappled with the grey of seasons, nosed gently at the underbrush, her form silhouetted against the tree line. But it was what she guarded that shocked them. Two fawns, spindly-legged and wide-eyed, their fur a soft brown. No, wait. One fawn staggered forward, its coat not brown but a faint cream, stripes faint but unmistakable, golden eyes mirroring Arya's own. The doe turned, ears flicking toward the approaching truck, unafraid, as if recognizing the scent of those who'd once shared her mercy. Elias's heart stuttered, hands gripping the wheel until knuckles whitened. The doe had returned, not just any deer but her, the one from that frozen thicket, her maternal instinct unbroken, and the hybrid fawn, impossible, yet there it was, a living bridge between prey and predator, born of some wild anomaly or the doe's lingering bond, suckled perhaps in hidden meadows. Arya, from her enclosure miles back, let out a distant roar that carried on the wind, a call answered by the doe's soft snort. The group stood frozen, breaths clouding the chill air, the revelation reframing everything. The cub's survival wasn't chance, but a chain of compassion echoing through years. Lena knelt slowly, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks, her hand extended as the doe approached, nuzzling her palm with familiar warmth. "She came back," Lena whispered, voice breaking in the hush, the emotional truth crashing like waves. Their efforts, the doubts overcome, had rippled into this miracle, a silent justice where instinct defied fear. Harlan's skepticism shattered, his shoulders slumping as he watched the fawns play, the hybrid's awkward leaps a testament to life's quiet defiance. Mira's camera clicked softly, capturing the doe's eyes, knowing, pleading, while Elias felt the weight lift, his own redemption complete in this wild reunion. As night deepened, stars pricking the velvet sky, the group withdrew, leaving the clearing to its secrets. Engines cooled in the distance, highways empty under the moon. But the bond pulsed eternal, a white tiger's legacy, born from a deer's adoption, shocking the world with its enduring hope. Back at the center, Arya paced, her roar softening to a purr, as if sensing the circle closed. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of this white tiger reach more people who still believe in kindness. Winter's hush returned to Whispering Ridge, blanketing the reserve in a silver veil that muffled the world's edges, turning pines into sentinel ghosts under the moon's pale watch. Years had layered upon the memory of that frozen thicket like sediment in a riverbed, each season etching deeper the improbable tale of Arya and the doe who had first bridged the divide. The rehab center stood as it always had, its brick walls weathered but enduring, lights flickering softly against the encroaching night. Inside Arya's expansive habitat, a vast expanse of simulated wild, dotted with boulders and shallow streams, she paced with the quiet authority of her prime, her white coat a luminous banner in the dim glow. At 5 years old, she was the embodiment of misunderstood majesty, powerful flanks rippling with each step, golden eyes scanning the horizon beyond the reinforced barriers, instincts whispering of freedoms long denied. Elias Thorne, his frame leaner now from endless vigils, leaned against the observation post's railing, breath clouding the chill air as he watched her. The ranger's life had reshaped around her presence. Patrols that once isolated him now carried echoes of shared silences, his reports laced with advocacy for expanded protections. The daughter's visits had become regular, tentative steps toward mending fractures, her laughter mingling with Arya's distant rumbles during guided tours. Yet doubt lingered in the quiet hours. A shadow cast by the world's unyielding judgments, town meetings where farmers demanded relocation, officials citing risks to livestock and safety. Elias felt it coil in his chest, the moral weight of choices that could unravel everything they'd built. Lena Voss moved through the center's corridors with the grace of routine, her steps pausing at Arya's enclosure, hands pressing against the cool glass as if to bridge the invisible divide. The veterinarian's eyes, softened by time, held a depth born of quiet triumphs. The center's expansions, funded by Mira's evocative images that had gone viral, drawing supporters who saw in Arya not a threat, but a symbol of resilience. Harlan Reed, graying at the edges, had retired to consulting, his final rounds marked by reluctant pride. "She's outlasted us all," he'd muttered one frosty morning, his skepticism thawed into acceptance. But the staff's whispers persisted, an undercurrent of fear. Arya's growing restlessness, her roars that pierced the night like calls to kin, stirring rumors of escapes and unseen dangers. Mira, ever the chronicler, had returned for what she called her closing chapter, her camera slung low, capturing the subtle shifts, the way Arya's tail flicked toward the tree line, her body tensing at scents carried on the wind. "This bond can't hold forever," she confided to Lena over steaming mugs in the break room, the air heavy with the scent of pine from an open window. "The wild pulls at her, and us. We're just holding the line against what's coming." Lena nodded, her breath hitching, fingers tracing the scar on her palm from that rain-soaked surgery, a reminder of fragility, of the brother's loss that had once made her hands shake. The emotional undercurrents ran deep, compassion a fragile flame against the encroaching cold. The rising tension crested on a starless night, the wind howling through the reserve like a harbinger, rattling fences and scattering leaves across empty highways. Elias was roused by an urgent radio call. Lena's voice, strained and low. "She's trying to break out. The east fence. Hurry." His truck tore through the dark, engines growl the only sound against the storm's prelude, heart pounding with the dread of inevitability. He arrived to chaos contained, staff silhouetted by floodlights, Harlan barking orders as they reinforced a section where Arya had clawed at the wire, her massive form pacing just beyond, eyes wild with a desperation that mirrored his own buried fears. No blood marred the scene, just the raw urgency of her labored breaths, visible plumes rising like signals in the cold. Her paws pressing against the barrier as if pleading for release. The group gathered in the observation hut, the air thick with the scent of damp wool and tension, maps unrolled under harsh bulbs. "She's ready," Elias said, voice steady but edged with resolve, his hands clasped to still their tremor. "The world's out there, poachers, roads, but also freedom, keeping her here. It's not living." Harlan's face creased in shadow, the weight of decision pressing like the frost outside. Release her, and she's gone. Vulnerable, but cage her longer, and we break her spirit. Murmurs rippled. The intern's wide eyes, Mira's silent nod, fear clashing with the truth of Arya's silent judgment, her form beyond the glass, a testament to instincts denied. Lena stepped forward, her small act unfolding in the hush. She fetched Arya's favorite enrichment log, scented with wild herbs, and slid it under the fence, watching as the tigress nuzzled it, a low rumble vibrating the ground. "If we don't let her go," Lena whispered, tears held back behind a veil of determination, "we're no better than the cold that took her mother. She's earned the horizon." Nado. The late revelation came as dawn's first light pierced the clouds, casting long shadows across the clearing. Elias knelt at the reinforced gate, key in hand, when a rustle stirred the underbrush. The doe, aged but steadfast, emerging from the tree line with her hybrid fawn, now a young deer with faint stripes, at her side. But trailing them, hesitant and bold, was another form, a sleek white tigress, wild-born perhaps from distant migrations, her eyes locking on Arya through the fence. Recognition flashed. Arya's mother had kin, survivors drawn by rumors or instinct, the doe's path a living bridge. The group stilled, breaths catching, the deeper truth reframing the night. Arya wasn't alone. Her story had woven into the wild's vast tapestry, compassion's echoes calling her home. In the hush that followed, they opened the gate, the mechanism's creak echoing like a sigh. Arya paused, golden eyes sweeping the faces, Elias's steady gaze, Lena's trembling hand extended one last time, then stepped forward, her body brushing the doe's flank in a moment of silent alliance. The wild tigress chuffed softly, and Arya responded, the pair circling once before moving toward the forest's embrace, the doe and her fawn trailing as unlikely guardians. Elias watched, tears tracing cold paths down his cheeks, the redemption complete. In saving her, they'd saved the fragments of themselves, confronting morality in the face of her quiet strength. The reserve stretched out, dust settling in the wind, engines cooling in the distance as the sun crested. Arya paused at the tree line, turning once to roar, a sound of freedom, not farewell, before vanishing into the green. Years later, sightings whispered through the town, a white tigress with cubs at her side, pale forms walking into the horizon, symbols of survival's quiet justice. The world still needed kindness, for in its absence, even the wild's bonds frayed. Compassion born from fear's edge endured, a reminder that instinct and hope could heal what humans alone could not. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of Deer adopts an orphaned white tiger cub. What happened years later shocked everyone. See you in the next one.